On Pingree Park Road, a grim discovery was reported. A lifeless body found with a single deep and precise cut across the neck, severing from left to right. Scott Sessions had fallen victim to a brutal, random act of violence. Such violence does not occur without cause. Those close to Scott knew the only reason he would miss performing with the band was if he were gravely ill or no longer among the living. Surveillance footage later revealed a mystery man driving Scott's car, someone who was not Scott. This revelation led investigators to Kevin Dean Eastman, a figure previously unknown to many. Scott's friends recalled how he and Heather Frank had taken Scott up to that remote area. Kevin, known for an on-again, off-again relationship with Heather, was soon a person of interest. Heather Frank bore visible signs of abuse. Her right cheek badly bruised, black and blue, and a broken wrist. Yet she never reported Scott missing or dead. Suspicion swirled around her as she carried on with daily life, working, shopping, and even getting her nails done as if nothing had happened. Despite the whispers and doubts, she never involved the police. The question remained, what was she hiding? A desperate plea emerged to uncover the truth and protect others from further harm. In the midst of this darkness, investigators tried to piece together Kevin's mindset. He claimed to be responsive, yet he seemed intent on evading responsibility. With a chilling resolve, he attempted to conceal his actions, even clutching a gun in a frantic search for a place to hide a body. Scott Sessions was more than a victim. He was a vibrant soul known as the Jungle Joe among the movers and shakers. His trumpet was legendary, but it was his warmth and boyish humor that lit up every stage he graced. He cherished the bond forged with his fellow musicians, losing himself entirely in the music. That passion was the heartbeat of his life, driving every note he played with fervor and dedication. Music was his sanctuary, his love, his calling. Scott's reverence extended beyond the stage. His heartfelt performances of taps at veteran services revealed a deep love for God, country, and humanity. When Scott played taps, it was clear that every note sprang from a place of profound emotion buried deep within his heart. On February 8, 2020, in Greeley, Colorado, this vibrant life was tragically cut short. That evening, the weather was harsh, a snowy February night blanketing the town. Those venturing out were warned to bundle up against the cold that gripped Greeley. Scott was scheduled to perform with an Elvis impersonators band. As showtime neared, his absence became glaringly obvious. The show, however, had to go on, leaving his absence a haunting question mark. During halftime, whispers and concern spread among the band members. Texts and calls to Scott went unanswered, deepening the unease. The only explanation seemed to be grave illness or something far worse. Snow fell steadily that morning, cloaking the landscape in white, as if foreshadowing the chilling discovery soon to come. A snowplow driver patrolling near Pingree Park, some 40 to 50 miles north, stumbled upon a shocking scene. At the Monument Gulch exit on Pingree Park Road, a body lay near a burning tree. The driver attempted to extinguish the flames only to find a man lying lifeless beside the fire. Authorities were alerted immediately, confirming the grim reality. The victim was indeed Scott Sessions. His body was severely burned, charred beyond recognition, wrapped tightly in a blue blanket and plastic, secured with duct tape. A grim and horrifying sight. The weight of the discovery crushed those who knew him. Scott had no known enemies. He was a beloved figure, a man who would not invite such violence upon himself. In their minds, investigators believed Scott was the unfortunate target of a random, senseless crime, a rare and unsettling occurrence in their community. Scott's father, Stan Sessions, shared the pain of his loss, recalling how his dying wife repeatedly asked, who could have wanted to kill their Scotty? The question haunted them in the months that followed. At Scott's home, detectives uncovered the password to his last Facebook Messenger conversation, a dialogue with Heather Frank. This relationship was a secret kept from family, friends, and even bandmates. Heather Frank, a waitress at Doug's Diner and a devoted mother of 3 boys, was known for her love of jazz and frequent attendance at music shows. Yet beneath the surface, a troubled past lingered. Heather battled alcohol abuse. On February 8th, Scott had planned to visit her, marking the first major break in the investigation, that Scott had been at Heather Frank's residence just before disappearing. The second breakthrough came when Scott's vehicle was found parked in the King Soopers lot directly across from Heather's apartment. Surveillance captured a man driving Scott's car, parking it and then walking away, the mystery deepening. Though the footage was blurry and the man's face unclear, His winter clothing and careful behavior stood out. He circled the car multiple times, paying close attention to every detail. When investigators examined the vehicle, they found the floor mat discarded beneath it. The car was unlocked, keys left in the ignition, an odd and careless scene that added to the puzzle. This figure was the unknown man, clearly not Scott. Surveillance was intensified, cameras placed strategically on a light post facing Heather's apartment. It was then that Kevin Dean Eastman's vehicle was spotted. Kevin, with a troubled history, was linked directly to Heather. An outstanding arrest warrant from the Denver Police Department revealed past abuse toward Heather. The domestic violence history between them was well documented. Though known as a friendly oil field worker, Kevin's demeanor shifted drastically when alcohol was involved, casting a shadow over his character. Cell phone records confirmed that Heather and Kevin were present at the apartment when Scott arrived. 3 phones pinged from the same location for hours, suggesting all 3 individuals were together that night. With Scott missing, suspicion grew that something sinister had unfolded within those walls. Investigators formulated a theory. Scott was lured to Heather's apartment, where he was ambushed. The following morning, surveillance showed Kevin Eastman's car traveling to and from the area near where Scott's body was found. The evidence placed them as the last known people connected to Scott's fate, setting the stage for a chilling conclusion. At first, investigators held on to hope that Scott Sessions was still alive, but soon, crucial information emerged, linking Heather Frank and Kevin Dean Eastman to the grim disposal of a body deep in the mountains. Relentless surveillance on Heather's apartment began immediately, running around the clock as both she and Eastman came and went. These warrants targeted Kevin Eastman and Heather Frank. The plan was to detain both suspects the following morning. Surveillance had captured Heather leaving her apartment, clutching a coat, appearing unstable on her feet. Trailing just behind her was Kevin Eastman. Heather willingly climbed into the passenger seat of Eastman's vehicle. Neither returned after that. By early morning on the 16th, it was clear that Heather Frank and Kevin Eastman had fled her apartment. The previous evening, around 5:30, police had discreetly attached a tracker to Eastman's car. The device revealed that he drove out of town to a farm owned by a friend. Sheriff's Deputy Troy Bennell was dispatched early the next day to investigate. Using binoculars, he confirmed Eastman's identity as he tended a burn pit on the property. Bennell then followed Eastman to a nearby gas station. Detectives were keenly aware that Heather Frank was nowhere to be seen. At the gas station, Eastman was filling gas cans. It was at this moment that Bennell decided to make contact and place him under arrest. At the time of arrest, Eastman had water prepared nearby. He was found carrying a large knife, and investigators later discovered 2 spent .22 shell casings in his pockets. Detective Justin introduced himself calmly, shaking Eastman's hand despite the handcuffs, and invited him to take a seat as the interrogation began. At that point, authorities were still desperate to locate Heather Frank. Justin asked Eastman when he last saw her. Eastman replied it had been the previous day. When questioned about Valentine's Day on the 14th, Eastman revealed a heated argument the day before. He had proposed marriage to Heather, only to be flatly rejected. The detectives pressed on, seeking to understand the impact of her refusal. Eastman admitted feeling utterly deflated, describing himself as worthless. At first, he maintained a cool, cooperative demeanor with the detectives. Detectives revealed they had been monitoring someone connected to Heather via social media. They hinted Eastman might be aware of a disappearance making headlines in Greeley. Eastman acknowledged knowing about the missing person, referring to him as a musician, information he said Heather had shown him on her phone. A tense game of cat and mouse unfolded. Eastman probed what investigators knew, while the detectives sought to withhold key details. Gradually, the detectives began presenting evidence. They reminded Eastman that his vehicle had been caught on camera, driving up Highway 14 through a snowstorm, headed to Hooters Canyon. They confronted him with the fact that he and Heather had taken Scott Sessions there. Eastman feigned ignorance, claiming he had never seen Scott. The detectives pressed further, confirming that on Saturday night, Heather, Eastman, and Scott had all been at Heather's house. They urged Eastman to recount what had happened. Eastman's memory faltered. He denied recalling being there with Scott. Detectives insisted that he needed to acknowledge Scott's presence, noting Heather's prior relationship with Scott. Eastman admitted that such a scenario would be awkward. The detectives reminded him he had proposed to Heather just a week later, yet Scott had been there during the incident. Eastman faltered again. He claimed not to remember anyone named Scott, denying any knowledge of the man's identity. Detectives suggested Eastman had not intended harm, but that things escalated badly after he arrived. He remained evasive, unable to recall the events clearly. At one point, Eastman implied Heather Frank might have been responsible for killing Scott Sessions the night before. He alleged Scott had shown up for a date, been refused by Heather, but forcibly assaulted her. Eastman expressed discomfort sharing these claims, but maintained his version of events. He hinted that Heather acted in self-defense after Scott's aggression. Eastman admitted he had helped clean up the ensuing mess, portraying himself as a devoted partner. Though conflicted, Eastman claimed his loyalty to Heather was strong. Meanwhile, detectives executed a search warrant on Troy Bennell's ranch, seeking a potential murder weapon. Other units searched Heather's apartment, where Eastman challenged the investigators, taunting that if they were competent, they would find blood evidence. His words hinted at the violent nature of the crime. Eastman insisted the crime scene held abundant blood, daring the forensic team to prove their worth by uncovering it. The detectives pressed for details. Eastman described blood everywhere, implying the severity and brutality of the violence. His statement placed him at the heart of the crime scene, revealing knowledge only the perpetrator could possess. Emotional pleas followed as investigators sought resolution and safety for Heather. With Heather Frank still missing and an arrest warrant out for her, suspicion weighed heavily on her involvement. The investigation pressed forward amid uncertainty. Detectives labored late into the evening, scouring Troy Bennell's property. Bennell himself was brought in for questioning as the net tightened. At times, investigators wrestled with information they could not immediately disclose, forced to wait until clearance was granted. Darkness fell, but by day's end, a grim discovery was made. A body was found beneath a pile of debris destined for burning, wrapped in plastic and secured with baling wire. 2 gunshot wounds pierced the chest. Authorities suspected the victim was female, confirming their darkest fears. The chilling image before them was unmistakable. It was Heather Frank. In a separate interrogation room, detectives worked relentlessly with Kevin Dean Eastman, piecing together fragments of crucial information as tension mounted. Through their phones, investigators somehow uncovered grim details. Heather was found, her condition mirroring that of Scott Sessions. The detectives confronted Eastman with the brutal truth. Heather was dead, and he knew it. Scott Sessions was also dead. The pressure mounted as detectives urged Eastman to start talking. He grew agitated, convinced they were toying with him. The room held its breath, waiting for him to break. Detectives coached him to breathe, to steady himself, encouraging him to lift his head and inhale deeply through his nose, exhaling slowly. Every second counted as the interrogation intensified. Meanwhile, at Heather Frank's apartment, forensic teams uncovered a pool of blood, just as Eastman had ominously predicted. Beneath the carpet and black rubber mat, blood had seeped deeply, saturating the padding and staining the wooden floor beneath. The blood patterns told a harrowing story. Detectives surmised that Eastman likely hid behind the door, waiting. As Scott Sessions entered, he was ambushed from behind, caught completely off guard. A single, clean, and devastatingly deep cut ran across Scott's neck, from left to right, wrapping around to the spine's right side. The attack was swift, brutal, and executed with chilling precision. Suspicion grew that messages Heather sent to Scott were in fact sent by Eastman, using her phone to orchestrate the deadly encounter. When pressed about setting Scott up, Eastman dismissed the notion coldly, reducing Heather to her profession and denying any concern. The detectives confronted him with the accusation of luring Scott to Heather's house as part of a deadly trap. Eastman's cold justification, that Heather was a prostitute, was the breaking point in their discourse. Despite Eastman's claims, detectives ruled out Heather as Scott's killer. They questioned her capacity to commit such violence, suspecting instead that she may have been forced to witness the murder. Attention then turned to Troy Bennell, whose DNA was discovered on a cigarette pack wrapped with Heather's body. Bennell's evasive answers when questioned about Heather's death only deepened the mystery surrounding his involvement. When asked about the body found on his property, Bennell denied any knowledge, insisting he neither knew Heather Frank nor Kevin Dean Eastman, distancing himself from the horrific crime. Unlike Bennell, Eastman had a clear motive. Heather was a witness to his murder of Scott Sessions, making her a threat he was desperate to silence. Detectives remained unwavering, telling Eastman the truth they had uncovered. Heather was dead. The investigation was closing in, but Eastman's resolve began to waver as he asked for a lawyer. In a moment heavy with defeat, Eastman apologized, acknowledging that his life was over regardless of what came next. The interview was abruptly halted, sealing his fate. Larimer County investigators arrested Kevin Dean Eastman that Sunday, charging him with first-degree murder and tampering with a deceased human body. The brutal killings were no random act. They were fueled by jealousy, vengeance, and raw hatred. Eastman faced trial for the murders of both his ex-girlfriend, Heather Frank, and her love interest, Scott Sessions. The community mourned deeply. Scott had been a beloved figure, known through school, music, and church, a true reflection of the small-town fabric of Greeley. As the trial began, the prosecution laid out a grim narrative. This was a case rooted in domestic violence, power, control, coercion, revenge. The very hands that killed Scott and Heather had wrapped their bodies in plastic, set one ablaze, and prepared to burn the other. All evidence pointed squarely to one person, the defendant, Kevin Dean Eastman. The prosecution's case hinged on blood found on Eastman's clothing, linking him to Scott Sessions' murder, and his DNA on the baling wire that bound Heather's body. Despite these connections, some physical evidence remained elusive. The murder weapon and shell casings found in Eastman's possession could not be definitively tied to the crimes. The case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. Key weapons remained missing. When the defense took the floor, they challenged the foundation of the prosecution's case, arguing that Eastman's past violence was unfairly used to predict future guilt, and that jealousy alone did not prove murder. With lingering questions and unresolved evidence, the defense insisted that doubts would remain. They concluded that, given these uncertainties, the only just verdict would be not guilty. As the proceedings continued, Alex McLaughlin took the stand, called to testify about the abuse his mother, Heather Frank, endured at the hands of Kevin Dean Eastman. When asked to describe their relationship, Alex labeled it toxic, painting a grim portrait of a woman trapped in violence. Rumors swirled that someone had slit a throat and taken a life. Yet, these assumptions, like many before them, crumbled under scrutiny, lacking any foundation in fact. It became clear that the narrative was being twisted, casting Heather Frank as the alleged killer of Scott Sessions. When Scott Sessions' body was discovered at Pingree Park, investigators focused on a grim detail. Who had wrapped Scott's head in duct tape before the fire consumed his body? The answer lay in the DNA on that tape. It belonged to Heather Frank. The prosecution painted a dark portrait, alleging Heather had killed Scott in retaliation for rape. In a harrowing twist, the victim was turned into the accused. Yet, after more than 2 years of investigation, the authorities had no murder weapon. No crime scene pinpointed Heather's death, and no forensic or physical evidence linked Kevin Dean Eastman to either murder. The case was riddled with gaps. These voids seeded doubt. Doubt that would linger, hesitation that would persist. And in the face of uncertainty, only one verdict could stand: not guilty. The courtroom then turned to witness testimony as Alex McLaughlin stepped forward. Asked about his mother, Alex described her as a beautiful woman named Heather Frank. His testimony cast light on the torment she endured at the hands of Kevin Dean Eastman. When questioned about the relationship between his mother and Eastman, Alex labeled it toxic. He detailed the brutal injuries he witnessed, each a mark of violence and pain. Alex recounted seeing a deep slash across Heather's throat, a wound inflicted by a knife. The right side of her face was a mosaic of bruises, black and blue from severe beating. Her wrist, he revealed, had been broken, a silent testament to the abuse she suffered. Yet, to his knowledge, Heather never reported this assault. A friend of Heather's, Anthony Velarde, recalled a chilling text from Eastman. The message was a stark warning, claiming marriage to Heather and threatening deadly violence if anyone interfered. Eastman's words were brutal and explicit. He vowed to stab Anthony in the face and neck. The man was a roughneck, a threat that loomed large in the shadow of this grim tale. Eastman made it clear that if he acted, no one would ever find the victim's body. The prosecution sought to explain why Heather Frank never involved the police after Scott Sessions was murdered. Could Heather have saved herself? Could she still be alive had she alerted the authorities? It was suggested that Kevin Eastman may have been threatening harm not only to her, but also to her children. She was trapped in a desperate fight for survival, clinging to what she could. But eventually, that struggle came to a devastating end. The courtroom now turned live to the trial of Kevin Dean Eastman in Colorado. On the stand was Troy Bennell, on whose property Heather Frank's body had been discovered. The defense attorney, Miss Trevor, was invited to cross-examine Bennell, who remained under oath. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. During cross-examination, Bennell was confronted with past contradictions. He had told Detective Schell that he did not even know Eastman or Heather Frank. He was pressed on his earlier statement denying any acquaintance with the victims. His answers were evasive and inconsistent, casting doubt on his credibility. When detectives questioned Bennell about his DNA found on a cigarette pack near Heather's body, he offered no explanation, only denying involvement. Despite repeated requests, Bennell could not provide Detective Porter or Detective Geyer with any rationale for his DNA presence at the scene. He claimed not to recall conversations suggesting this evidence could implicate him as a suspect. Bennell's prior criminal record and suspicious behavior made him an easy alternative suspect. Cross-examination revealed many memory lapses. When asked if he had any motive to kill Scott Sessions on February 8th or 9th, Bennell firmly denied it. He also denied involvement in Scott Sessions' death or any subsequent cover-up. Shifting focus to the week after, Bennell denied shooting Heather Frank or covering up her murder. Throughout his testimony, Kevin Dean Eastman showed little emotion. Occasionally, he smiled at his defense team, but mostly he remained stoic during the trial. As the prosecution prepared to deliver its closing argument, the weight of the case hung heavy. They asserted that this tragedy, this brutal loss, had one man at its center, Kevin Dean Eastman. It was Eastman's actions alone that led to the deaths of Heather Frank and Scott Sessions, deaths marked by violence and cold calculation. The prosecution insisted that every credible piece of evidence pointed to one reasonable conclusion: Eastman's guilt on all charges. They urged the jury to deliver verdicts consistent with this truth. In response, defense attorney Ashley Morris painted a different picture. She proposed an alternative theory. Heather Frank had killed Scott Sessions in a moment of desperate retribution. According to the defense, Eastman and Bennell only became involved after the fact, helping to cover up the aftermath. Bennell, in panic, allegedly killed Heather Frank, hiding her body on his property. Morris acknowledged Eastman's flaws, his abusive past and mistakes, but urged the jury not to let personal feelings cloud their judgment. She argued that the prosecution had failed to answer fundamental questions: who, what, when, where, and how. Thus, she was confident the jury would find Eastman not guilty of these murders. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. I sat beside Stan Sessions, Scott's father, as the jury delivered their decision on the first count: murder in the first degree for Stanley Scott Sessions. The jury found Kevin Dean Eastman guilty. Stan Sessions responded with a quiet fist pump, then bowed his head in prayer. On the second count, murder in the first degree for Heather Frank, the jury again found Eastman guilty. This time, Stan showed no visible reaction, simply staring at the judge as the verdict was read. The judge recited guilty verdicts on 7 counts. The courtroom was heavy with the weight of justice served. The following day, all jury members returned for sentencing, a rare occurrence showing the gravity they attached to the case. Stan Sessions was invited to speak, delivering a powerful statement from the heart. He acknowledged that Scott was not perfect, but emphasized his unwavering love for family. Stan was pained by false accusations that Scott had committed rape, vehemently denying any truth to such claims. In 54 years, Scott Sessions had never faced such a complaint. He was not the man the prosecution's narrative tried to paint. As the courtroom absorbed Stan's heartfelt words, it was clear that this trial had not just been about guilt or innocence, but about truth and remembrance. The jury's unanimous guilty verdict on all counts marked a conclusive chapter in this tragic saga. The truth had emerged, but the scars of these brutal murders would linger for years to come. Stan Sessions stood resolute, a symbol of a father's enduring love and a community's search for justice. His words echoed beyond the courtroom, reminding all that while no one is perfect, the truth must never be lost in the shadows of accusation. Finally, Stan Sessions affirmed his faith and commitment to truth, closing a painful chapter with dignity and strength. Scott Sessions' father spoke with quiet conviction, grounded in his faith in the Gospels of Christ. For 2 years he wrestled with the burden of forgiveness, determined not to carry the weight of hatred for the man who shattered his family. He declared he would not allow Kevin Dean Eastman, nor anyone else, to dictate the course of his happiness for the rest of his life. To Eastman, he extended no rancor, only a hope and prayer. He wished that Eastman would embrace the prison's rehabilitative offerings, find solace in faith, and strive to become a better man. deep in his heart he believed justice had been served. The courtroom acknowledged this somber moment, with the state of Colorado formally offering its condolences for the loss of Scott Sessions, honoring the profound grief of his father. Alex McLaughlin, Heather Frank's son, stepped forward to share his pain. His mother had been more than a parent. She was his closest friend. The memories they forged would be cherished eternally, yet the ache of her absence was raw and unyielding. In a statement heavy with restrained emotion, Alex confessed he had yet to forgive Kevin Dean Eastman. The hatred had faded, replaced by a deep disappointment in the unimaginable choices Eastman had made. He prayed that one day Eastman would grasp the full horror of his actions, which had extinguished not only his mother's life but also that of Scott Sessions. His heart, prayers, and condolences extended to Scott's family and friends. The courtroom responded with solemn respect. Alex was told his mother would be proud, as the state of Colorado reiterated its condolences. Scott Sessions was remembered as a gifted musician. His life centered around the power of music. To close the hearing, a short video was played, capturing Scott's spirit through his music. The courtroom was moved to tears, every eye wet with sorrow, honoring him in a final, poignant tribute. When asked if he wished to speak, Kevin Dean Eastman declined, choosing silence over words. The weight of the moment hung heavy as the court acknowledged his decision. Colorado law prohibits the death penalty, leaving the judge with a grim choice: life with the possibility of parole, or life without. Eastman was sentenced to spend the remainder of his natural life behind bars. The judge's decision reflected the viciousness of Eastman's crimes, acts driven by violence, jealousy, and control, culminating in the brutal murder of 2 innocent lives, followed by the disrespectful disposal of their bodies. This final sentence ensured Eastman would never walk free again. As the court recessed, the chilling reality settled over all present. The only course left was to lock him away, preventing any future atrocities. Yet an ominous trial loomed ahead. In the end, it was clear: Eastman would have to answer to a higher power for what he had done.